Hi, I'm Alara. My husband once stared me dead in the eye and said, "I'm done living with a weak failure like you." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, "All right." That one word. It shattered something in him more than all the years I stayed silent. He thought I was folding, but really, I was filing. A month later, his lawyer's hands shook in court when he realized I wasn't the wife, I was the CEO. Now ask yourself, what kind of woman lets her husband believe he's in charge, just long enough for him to walk off a cliff she quietly built for him? Where are you listening from today? What time is it there? Tell me in the comments, then let me tell you how silence became my sharpest blade. The laughter was still echoing through the penthouse when I carried the empty wine glasses to the kitchen. The scent of roasted garlic and expensive perfume hung in the air, mixing with the faint chill that slipped in every time someone opened the balcony door. From the dining table, I could hear Rowan's voice, loud, confident, charming, in the way that makes people lean closer, even when they should know better. "Rowan, you really pulled it off this time," one of his associates said, the kind who wore cufflinks just to drink whiskey. "That presentation today, brilliant." He chuckled. "It's all about timing, right? I told Alara numbers are her thing, but vision, that's mine." Everyone laughed. It was the kind of laugh that fills a room, but leaves one person out. I smiled, setting another plate into the sink. The water ran too hot, so I turned it down and focused on the rhythm of rinsing, drying, stacking. My hands knew the motions so well they didn't need my mind. My name hadn't been said all night, except when I refilled glasses or took coats. I used to tell myself that was fine, that love doesn't need an audience. But tonight, his words clung to me like smoke. When I came back into the room, Margot, his mother, was adjusting the centerpiece, making sure it was perfectly aligned. She gave me a smile that never touched her eyes. "You've really outdone yourself, dear," she said, each word coated in politeness and poison. "Rowan's lucky to have someone who enjoys hosting." Lucky. That word again. "Thank you," I said softly. My voice sounded steady, but something in me had shifted. The guests were still talking about Rowan's success story, the empire he was building, the genius behind his recent deal. They didn't know I'd been the one staying up until 2 a.m. reviewing contracts, catching the mistakes his team missed. Rowan always said I had a knack for details, but no one ever saw the details. As I reached for another glass, his voice cut through the chatter. "Careful, honey," he said, that teasing tone he used when he wanted to sound playful, but make sure everyone heard. "She's great with numbers, but not decisions." The table erupted in laughter. My hand froze. The glass slipped, hit the counter, and cracked. Not shattered, just split down the middle. The sound was small, but it sliced through me. I stared at the fracture running like a thin vein through the clear surface. Rowan sighed dramatically. "That's just like you. Can't even hold it together." He didn't mean it cruelly, not in his mind. That was the problem. He never thought it was cruel when it came from him. I placed the cracked cup on the shelf, right where it had always been. I didn't look at him. My fingers trembled slightly, but I kept smiling. By the time the last guest left, the apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the city outside. Chicago lights flickered through the windows, reflecting off the marble floors. Rowan was already on the phone, pacing, his tone full of victory. "Yeah, I think it sealed the deal. She handled the details, but I closed it. They love confidence." He said it like I wasn't standing 10 feet away. I moved to the sink, washing the last of the plates. My reflection in the window looked like someone else, poised, composed, invisible. I'd been that girl all my life. The one who kept the peace, who made sure everyone felt comfortable. The one who believed that love meant being quiet when others shouted. But tonight, something was cracking in more than just glass. When he hung up, he didn't look at me. "You should clean up the balcony," he said, his tone clipped. "It's starting to look messy out there." "Sure," I murmured. I stepped outside into the cold. The city spread beneath me, thousands of windows glowing, none of them looking back. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from the chill, but from the realization that I could disappear from this life and no one here would notice. Back inside, I turned off the lights in the kitchen. The cracked cup caught the glow from the under-cabinet lamp, a thin silver line running through it like lightning frozen in porcelain. I picked it up again, holding it under the light. It wasn't broken, not yet, just marked. I ran my thumb along the edge, feeling where smoothness met fracture. It wasn't sharp enough to cut me, but I knew, if I pressed harder, it could. "Silence can be louder than words," I whispered, setting the cup back in place. It stayed there on the shelf, gleaming faintly under the kitchen light. A quiet witness. Rowan called from the hallway. "Don't forget to lock up." "I won't," I said, but I was no longer sure what I meant. That night, as the city settled into sleep, I stood there longer than I needed to. The cup stayed in my line of sight. That single crack, shining under the light, was small enough for anyone else to miss. But not me. I'd remember it. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the last night I'd ever stay silent. I didn't sleep, not even a little. I stood in the hallway long after the lights were off, long after Rowan had disappeared into the bedroom. The silence didn't comfort me. It pressed down on my chest, made my breath come shallower. That night marked something. I could feel it in my bones, in the stillness between seconds. I'd spent years learning to live with quiet, but this was different. This was the kind of silence that didn't settle. It shifted, cracked, waited to be broken. Through the wall, his voice drifted from the study. Still on the phone, still laughing. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. I caught enough. "Yeah, she's good for the image. Stands there looking polished, keeps it soft, makes me look balanced." He laughed. So did whoever was on the other end, probably his mother. I poured myself a glass of wine I didn't want and carried it to the window. The glass felt cold in my fingers, like it knew it didn't belong here either. The skyline shimmered beneath us, indifferent. That was always Rowan's game. Appearances. Control the lighting, the seating, the story. Make sure the people who mattered saw what he wanted them to see. And I was part of the backdrop, one of the pieces that helped him appear grounded. I watched the city breathe as I sipped. My eyes burned. Not from tears. I hadn't cried. I was just tired. The door to the study creaked open. I didn't turn around. I felt him before I heard him. The smell of cologne, the slow footsteps, the loosened tie he thought made him look relatable. "You looked lost tonight," he said behind me, casual. "Like you didn't know why you were even there." I turned, resting the glass on the console. "I was there because I hosted the entire evening." He smirked, walking closer. "Yeah, but you stood there like a ghost. People notice that. You make me look weak when you just fade out like that." I looked at him, really looked. His shirt half untucked, his eyes glassy from wine and ego. "Maybe," I said slowly. "You feel weak next to someone you can't control." His smile faltered. "Control?" He laughed. It wasn't the charming kind. It was short, ugly, full of disbelief. "You? Control something? You don't even have a career, Alara. You organize flowers and sign RSVPs. I'm done living with a weak failure like you." I didn't flinch. Instead, I held his gaze. I let the words hang there between us like smoke. Then I said simply, "All right." He stared at me, probably waiting for the follow-up, the apology, the begging, the denial. But I didn't give him any of that. I turned and walked toward the kitchen. My bare feet were nearly silent against the hardwood, but each step felt like it echoed louder than anything he'd ever said. He called after me, voice rising. "That's it? That's all you've got? All right?" But I was already gone from that room. I stood at the kitchen counter, again, hand resting lightly on the same cracked porcelain cup. It was still there, right where I'd left it. I ran a finger along the fracture. It hadn't spread. My mother used to say that holding your tongue was a sign of strength. I was the quiet one, the mediator, the one who never raised her voice, even when she had every reason to. But now, standing in that cold, fluorescent kitchen, I wondered if silence had been my jail. Maybe I'd mistaken stillness for strength all this time. Maybe silence could mean something else. I whispered the words out loud. Maybe silence isn't surrender. I walked past the cracked cup and down the hall to my study. Rowan never came in here. He said it felt sterile, too tidy, not warm enough for his taste. That suited me just fine. I flicked on the desk lamp. The soft glow lit the white walls and neat shelves. In the bottom drawer was a locked file cabinet. I bent down, opened it slowly. My fingers knew the code. The folder was still there, tucked behind old receipts and some birth certificates. Labeled neatly, Vexler Holdings, Registration. I pulled it out and placed it on the desk. My name was there, my full legal name, not his. The paper was smooth beneath my fingers, but my heart didn't race. Instead, it slowed, like something had finally aligned. He'd never asked about it, not once. He assumed, as he always did, that everything that held him up belonged to him. I closed the folder, slid it back into place, and locked the drawer. As I turned out the light in the study, the hallway outside was quiet again. In the living room, the city still shimmered in the windows. Rowan had gone silent, maybe asleep, maybe stunned, maybe still waiting for me to come back and fight. But I didn't need to fight. I'd already made my decision. I turned off the last lamp and stood for a moment, letting the darkness settle in. The only light left came from the city. It flickered on the glass windows, dancing across the marble floors. He thought he knew who I was, but that woman was gone. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. There was power in it, not the kind Rowan chased, flashy, loud, performative. Mine was rooted, deliberate, the kind that didn't flinch when storms rolled in. From my window, the skyline was still a silhouette of steel and fog. A city that had no memory of last night's cruelty or my husband's hollow victories. And maybe that was the freedom in it. Each morning, the world pressed reset. But I remembered everything. I buzzed Miriam in. "Can you forward the transcript from the acquisition meeting last quarter?" She raised an eyebrow. "You think he's going to try and float those numbers again?" "Probably. And when he does, I want documentation ready. If he walks into that boardroom pretending to hold the leash, I'll be holding the chain." Miriam didn't blink. She just nodded and walked out. She had seen enough over the years to stop asking why I stayed married to a man like Rowan. She understood that sometimes the most dangerous weapon wasn't a scream, it was a signature. I opened another drawer and pulled out a small leather-bound book. It was older than the company itself. Inside, scribbled in my own hand, were the first projections I ever ran on Vexler Holdings, back when it was on the verge of collapse, back when Rowan was begging banks for mercy while throwing his suits at dry cleaners as if the crease in his lapel would save his reputation. He never asked who paid the supplier debt. He never questioned how the books balanced again. He just assumed the market had turned, and luck had chosen him. I had made him solvent. I had turned his sinking name into a floating brand, and in return, he offered me shadows, a name not on the door, a voice not at the table, a thank you whispered through teeth clenched around his pride. A vibration from my phone broke the thought. A message from David, one of the quieter partners. He's meeting with Donnerson Capital this afternoon. Says he's ready to expand fast. Wants a cash infusion. I stared at it. I didn't panic. There was no need. I had veto power over any new investor. Not just influence, legally binding control. But I knew what that message meant. Rowan wasn't just arrogant anymore. He was reckless. And reckless men in positions of false power were dangerous, not just to themselves, but to everything around them. I took a breath and stood. I wasn't angry. Anger had come and gone years ago. This was clarity. I slid the leather book back into the drawer and locked it. Then I looked around the room I had built, quietly, methodically, without applause, and whispered to no one, "Let him try." My eyes returned to the contract on my desk, the ink still drying beneath my name. She smiled at the signature on the final page, her own, and thought, "Let him keep underestimating me a little longer." The warmth of the morning had faded into a thin, cold sheen of late autumn sun. Hours had passed, but the words I'd spoken that morning echoed like a quiet drumbeat. Let him keep underestimating me a little longer. I hadn't planned to attend the investor luncheon, but the moment Miriam forwarded the guest list to my phone, I changed my mind. By 2 o'clock, I was inside the Fairmont's ballroom, marble floors, glass chandeliers, servers in black vests gliding silently between cocktail tables. I didn't need a name tag or a seat at the front to be powerful. I'd learned long ago that real authority rarely needed to announce itself. Rowan stood on the stage, dressed in his favorite navy blazer, the one he swore made him look in charge. I watched him adjust the mic like he was claiming a throne. His voice rang out, smooth and polished, all theater. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "when I founded Vexler Holdings, I had one vision: to innovate, to grow, to lead. Today, we've never been stronger." I stood near the back, behind a pillar, sipping lemon water. His words washed over the room like practiced waves. The crowd nodded, applauded, believed. He said, "My company, my results, my plans." Not once did my name come up. Not that I expected it. Rowan performed best when he thought no one was keeping score. I caught Miriam's eyes across the room, her lips thinned, expression unreadable. We both knew this show wasn't for the audience. It was for himself, his ego, freshly polished like his shoes. Then came the sentence that made the air shift. "We're opening a 30% stake in Vexler Holdings to outside investors," Rowan said. "The deal will close by the end of the quarter." I didn't blink, but my pulse paused for half a second. It was a practiced pause, just long enough to know I'd heard him correctly. He was selling something that didn't belong to him. Miriam was already beside me. I leaned in and whispered, "Take down every name. I want a list of everyone who raises their hand today." She didn't nod. She didn't need to. We'd worked together long enough. Rowan went on about valuation, returns, projected growth. Numbers he had no hand in calculating. Strategies I had personally signed off on last quarter. I watched him gesture toward a screen of fake forecasts, as if rehearsing for a movie where he played the genius and I was just background scenery. But the danger wasn't in his lies, it was in who might believe them. After the applause died and the mingling began, I slipped out. I waited near the parking entrance, coat pulled over my shoulders, eyes scanning the crowd. Rowan stepped out 10 minutes later, laughing with 2 men I recognized from the event. When they left, I called his name. He turned. "Alara, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same." He looked amused, not nervous. That was always his flaw. Thinking charm was a shield. "That speech, I said." "You really committed to it?" He shrugged. "It landed, didn't it? You just offered a third of something that isn't yours to sell." He rolled his eyes. "Here we go. This again. It's not a matter of opinion, Rowan. It's a matter of ownership. Legal, documented, notarized ownership. I'm saving this company, he snapped. You wouldn't understand the game. I'm playing chess while you're still reading the rules. No, I said, quietly. You're selling air, wrapped in a pretty package. He leaned in, smirk twisted. People pay more for the wrapping. My voice didn't rise. Be careful, you're running out of air. I didn't wait for a comeback. I walked to my car, started the engine, and pulled out into the traffic without a glance in the rearview mirror. The silence inside the car was thick, but it didn't feel empty. It felt deliberate. By the time I hit Lakeshore Drive, the city outside looked still, glass towers and lake winds folding into one another. I turned the radio off. I wanted no voices in the car but my own. I thought of the early years, when I let him introduce me as his wife, at events where I'd signed the checks, when I smiled through dinners while he talked over me, when I believed that love meant stepping back, letting someone else shine. But now I saw it differently. Letting someone else shine doesn't mean burning yourself down. I pulled into the garage and took the elevator up. Inside the apartment, the air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had heard what he said. I glanced at the cracked porcelain cup still on the counter. Light hit the fracture again, and this time it didn't look broken. It looked alive. In the bathroom mirror, I met my own eyes. No more, I whispered. No more pretending. No more covering for him. No more letting charm mask rot. He had given me every chance to stop, and he had just sold the last one. The house was quiet when I got home, too quiet. Rain tapped against the tall windows, streaking the glass in soft silver lines. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. The city outside cast enough glow to guide me through the living room, past the marble counter, past the cracked porcelain cup still resting where I left it that morning. By 11:20, I was in my office. A single desk lamp burned low, its light barely touching the stacks of files spread across the table. I opened my laptop, scrolled through the press release from the event earlier that day, and read his words in black and white. Vexler Holdings announces expansion under the leadership of Rowan Vexler. Every sentence was a theft, not just of my work, not just of the company I built, of time, of years, of the quiet sacrifices he'd never see. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. He calls me weak because he can't imagine strength that doesn't scream. It wasn't anger that moved through me now. It was clarity, cool and steady. I reached into the drawer beneath my desk, the same one he'd never known existed, and turned the small brass key. The lock clicked softly. Inside were layers of careful history. Manila folders labeled with quiet precision. Registration, taxes, assets, transfers. Everything that Rowan thought was his, sitting neatly under my maiden name, Finch. I pulled one binder out and opened it to the section stamped 5 years ago. The memory came back without effort. Him pacing in our old apartment, shouting about layoffs, about idiot investors, about how the market had turned on him. And me, behind the scenes, calling in favors, restructuring debt, rebranding the company under Finch Capital before merging it back into Vexler Holdings. He'd signed every page I'd asked him to, too proud or too careless to read them. I ran my fingers along the signature lines. The paper smelled faintly of toner and truth. For years, it had waited, untouched, like a silent ally. My phone buzzed once. Miriam. I answered on speaker, eyes still on the documents. "Still awake?" she asked. Her tone was soft, but there was steel in it. She knew me too well. "I couldn't sleep if I wanted to," I said. I figured. I went ahead and pulled the contracts from the archive. "You want me to send them over tonight?" "By Monday morning," I replied. "Directly to our attorney. No noise, no email trails, just physical copies." There was a pause. Are we doing this, Alara? Yes, I said. If he insists on playing king, let's show him the real board. I heard the quiet exhale on the other end. All right, I'll have everything sealed by morning. Thank you, Miriam. When I hung up, I took another document from the pile, a deed transfer, the penthouse. Rowan always called it his home, as if I'd been some guest allowed to decorate. I smiled faintly, signing my name again, notarizing my sole ownership. The pen didn't tremble once. I wasn't shaking anymore, not with fear, not with rage, just with purpose. I placed the signed copy into a fresh folder, marked it with the date, and closed the drawer again. The sound of the lock sliding into place echoed through the quiet room like punctuation. For the first time in years, I felt weight leave my shoulders. I leaned back, glancing toward the kitchen through the open door. The cracked cup caught the reflection of the desk lamp. For the first time, it didn't look broken. It looked mended, as if the light itself had filled the fracture. I whispered, "All right," not as surrender, not as exhaustion, but as readiness. The clock ticked past midnight. Rain softened into drizzle. The city lights blurred against the glass like brushstrokes of quiet fire. I closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and stood in darkness. Every document I needed was locked and sealed. Every truth was waiting for its day in the sun. He thought he could lie his way into more power. He didn't realize that I'd already built the proof that would undo him. She had all the proof she needed, and a storm waiting to be named. Monday morning arrived with the same gray sky that had hung over the city all weekend. The air felt heavy, damp, and oddly still, like Chicago itself knew something was about to break. I drove to the Vexler Holdings headquarters earlier than usual, coffee in hand, my reflection steady in the elevator glass. When the doors opened to the executive floor, voices were already raised. Rowan's voice. "Who the hell pulled out of the deal?" he snapped, pacing the corridor. His tie hung loose, his hair slightly unkempt, signs he hadn't slept. "Langford said it was solid. What happened overnight?" I stepped through the door quietly. "You seem upset." He turned fast, eyes narrowing. "This isn't your concern." I smiled faintly. "Isn't it?" He didn't answer. He just ran a hand through his hair and muttered something under his breath about incompetence. Behind him, Miriam stood with her usual calm, clipboard in hand, watching everything without a word. She caught my eye for half a second, a flicker of quiet acknowledgement passing between us. Rowan slammed his phone onto the desk. "An investor backed out this morning, said there's conflicting ownership data. Can you believe that? I told them I own this company." I walked closer, set my bag down gently, and took a sip of my coffee. "Maybe the confusion isn't theirs." He glared at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could answer, Mr. Latham, our company attorney, appeared at the door. Always punctual, always unreadable, his presence carried a quiet gravity that made even Rowan pause. "Mr. Vexler," Latham said, stepping in, "I've just reviewed the updated filings with the state registry. There's something unusual." Rowan crossed his arms. "Unusual how?" Latham opened a folder and laid it on the desk. "According to these documents, the primary shareholder and legal owner of Vexler Holdings is," he glanced up, "Ms. Finch." The room fell silent. Rowan blinked once, then twice, as if the words didn't make sense. "That's impossible." I leaned slightly against the edge of the desk, unbothered. "Not impossible," I said softly. "Just inconvenient." He snatched the papers from Latham's hands, flipping through them as if his eyes could rewrite the ink. No, this isn't right. You signed them over to me years ago." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Rowan, you assumed I would." His face went pale, the confidence draining like color from a photograph. He looked at Latham, desperate for backup. This has to be an error. Tell her this is some kind of mistake. Latham adjusted his glasses. The filings are official, sir. Dated, notarized, verified. Ms. Finch has been the legal principal for 5 years. The word principal hung in the air like a verdict. Rowan's mouth opened, then closed again. I could see the moment he realized what that meant. The deals he'd pitched, the promises he'd made, all built on a foundation that wasn't his. He turned to me, his voice rising. You planned this, I shrugged. You call it planning. I call it foresight. He took a step toward me, lowering his tone. You're trying to humiliate me. No, I said simply. I'm just letting the truth do its job. He stared at me, then at the papers again, his breathing uneven. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. The man who built his empire on noise, now silenced by facts he never cared to read. He stormed out of the office, phone already to his ear, barking orders to someone on the other end. I watched from the glass wall as he tried to spin the narrative, shouting about control, about miscommunication, about how this would all be fixed by end of day. But the reflection told the real story. His face in the glass looked small, distorted against the skyline. The louder he got, the less solid he seemed. For years he'd used my quiet to feel powerful. Now that same quiet pressed down on him, exposing every crack he'd tried to hide. Miriam approached me gently. He's not taking it well, she murmured. He wouldn't, I said, slipping my phone into my bag. Men like Rowan never prepare for consequences. They just assume they'll never have any. She hesitated. Do you want me to stay for the rest of the day? No, I said, shaking my head. Let him think I've gone home. It'll make him more nervous. As I walked toward the elevator, I heard him shouting again in the distance. Words like fix it and ownership transfer echoed down the hallway, hollow and panicked. The elevator doors slid open, cool air brushing against my skin. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby, and whispered almost to myself, You built everything on my silence. Let's see how you handle its weight now. The doors closed, and the reflection of the skyline faded away. He'd finally noticed the silence, and it terrified him. It was close to 9 when the storm outside reached the penthouse. Rain lashed against the windows like it was trying to claw its way in, thunder low and rolling in the distance. Inside, everything was still. I'd turned off the music, dimmed the lights, and sat quietly in the living room, a book open on my lap but unread. I knew he'd come. The front door slammed open so hard the walls seemed to shake. Rowan's footsteps echoed, fast and angry, like a man walking toward war. You went behind my back, he bellowed, dripping with rain. His coat clung to his shoulders, soaked and disheveled, his tie loose and twisted. You humiliated me in front of my board. I didn't move. I didn't humiliate you, I said, voice calm. You just finally saw yourself without the mirror you built. That's when it happened. He grabbed the nearest thing, a glass from the bar, and hurled it across the room. It shattered near my feet, shards scattering like ice. Still, I didn't flinch. Feel better? I asked softly. He stood there, chest heaving, face red. His mouth opened, then shut again, as if he realized how that just looked, how it felt. But instead of backing down, he shifted. You think you're so clever, he growled. But this little game you're playing, it won't last. I've got proof. You forged those documents, every signature, every date. I've got copies and I've got witnesses. You won't survive 5 minutes in court. I stood slowly and walked to the dining table. My voice stayed level. You really did it, I said. You really forged evidence. He blinked. What the hell are you talking about? I know your handwriting, Rowan. I know your style. You date things in that crooked slant. You abbreviate the month every time. And you weren't even in the country on half of those dates. His mouth tightened. I checked the flight records, I added. You were in Zurich, on company money. He stepped toward me, jaw tight. You can't prove that. I don't need to. You just did. The look in his eyes changed then. Not rage, not arrogance, just fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. He turned away, pacing. I could see the thoughts spinning behind his eyes. His whole identity had been built on noise, on presence, performance, power. And now, stripped of it all, he looked smaller. We stood like that for a while. The thunder rolled again. Then I left him there. I walked down the hall into the study and closed the door behind me. My breath didn't catch until I was alone. I sat down at my desk, fingers resting on the keyboard but unmoving. And for the first time since this all began, my hands trembled. Not because I was scared, because I was tired. I opened the voice memo app on my phone and hit record. I wanted you to see me, I whispered. Not fear me, but maybe you can't tell the difference. My phone lit up, Miriam calling. I answered with a soft, "Hi." "You okay?" she asked immediately. "I'm fine," I said, almost smiling. "But he's not." A long pause. Then her voice, steady and warm. "I'm here if you need backup." "I've already got everything I need." When the call ended, I reached for the printer. I'd spent weeks preparing these. I printed the final copy of the legal summons, slid it into a cream-colored envelope, and wrote his name across the front in ink. No flourish, no signature, just Rowan Vexler. I walked back out into the living room. He wasn't there anymore, probably locked in the guest room rehearsing his next move. I set the envelope down on the dining table, right next to a half-full glass of wine he'd abandoned. The contrast struck me. One was emptying itself slowly, losing its body. The other held all the weight of truth. I whispered, almost to myself, "This is how endings look when they're earned." The rain hit harder against the glass as I turned off the lights and walked away. The next time he'd see that envelope, it would be in court. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing under a stretch of gray sky, the courthouse looming above me in sharp, cold lines. I adjusted my coat and stepped through the glass doors. The echo of my heels on the marble was steady, like the beat of a slow drum announcing what was about to begin. Inside the courtroom, it was almost too quiet. No one dared to speak above a whisper. Even the shuffle of paper or a cough seemed intrusive. I wore navy that morning, not because I wanted to stand out, but because it reminded me of calm water, still and deep. Rowan was already seated with his attorney, whispering rapidly like a man trying to plug a hole in a sinking boat. He didn't look at me, not once. In my mind, I said it again. All right, not as surrender, not anymore, just the breath before the fall. Mr. Clark, Rowan's lawyer, stood first. He opened with a firm tone, laced with confidence. "Your Honor, we contend that Ms. Finch has presented documents that are not only misleading, but potentially forged. We intend to prove that the ownership she claims was signed over years ago, making Mr. Vexler the rightful executive of all holdings currently in question." I watched, not blinking. My own attorney stood slowly, no dramatics, no grandstanding. "Your Honor," she said, "we have prepared a full trail of documentation. Original ownership filings, notarized contracts, IRS filings, and digital records, all tracing the assets in question to Ms. Finch's legal name. These were never transferred. The evidence speaks for itself." She stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the bench. Each page bore a seal, a date, a signature. My name, Alara Finch, inked clearly, consistently. The room didn't breathe. The judge, a woman with eyes like frost and a voice as smooth as stone, turned the pages slowly. Each click of the paper echoed through the walls. Mr. Clark shifted in his seat. Rowan tugged at his collar. Judge Mendez didn't rush. She read as if the weight of decades rested on every sentence. Then she looked up. "Mr. Vexler," she said, her voice level. "According to the documentation reviewed, your company, primary residence, and all associated accounts are and have remained in Ms. Finch's name. There are no legal transfers, no sale agreements, no authorization for management without written consent." Rowan leaned forward, almost stammering. That can't be. I've run this company for years. Everyone knows it." "That may be," she replied, "but the law recognizes ownership, not performance." Clark spoke again, but his voice cracked halfway through. "We weren't made aware of these filings, Your Honor. This is highly irregular." "No," she interrupted. "It's just inconvenient. There's a difference." I didn't move, didn't smirk, just sat straighter in my chair, letting silence be my answer. That silence felt louder than applause. The room slowly emptied after the adjournment was called. My heels echoed once more as I walked to the small refreshment table outside the chamber. I poured a glass of water and found a chipped porcelain cup, the kind that would be tossed in most offices for something newer. I held it for a long second. The imperfection at the rim wasn't sharp. It was smooth from years of wear, like something used often, but still intact. I smiled. That crack didn't mean broken. It meant survived. I took a sip, then whispered it again. All right. This time, it meant free. Behind me, I felt the eyes. Rowan hadn't left. He stood frozen near the door, the envelope still in his hands, unopened. For once, his shoulders drooped. He didn't yell, didn't demand. Just watched me like someone realizing the house they'd lived in wasn't theirs, and never had been. And when he finally looked at me, it wasn't anger in his eyes. It was the realization that he'd never really known me at all. He looked at me like he'd just met a stranger in a familiar home, as if all those years he'd been speaking to a silhouette instead of a woman with a spine. I didn't look back, not when the doors closed behind me, not during the ride home, not even the next day when the media swarmed his name like bees chasing a disturbed hive. That was a month ago. Today, I'm sitting by the edge of Lake Michigan, coffee in hand, coat wrapped tightly around me. The chill in the air feels clean, like something has finally settled. There's no phone beside me, no calendar reminders, no urgent messages blinking in red, just waves brushing against the rocks, soft and unhurried, the kind of quiet that once used to scare me. Now it holds me like a lullaby. I used to think peace was something you earned, that you had to climb toward it. Now I know better. Peace isn't found. It's what's left when you stop apologizing for who you became. I take a sip. The wind moves through the branches above like it's humming to itself, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm not running from or toward anything. Just being. Miriam called yesterday. She had that tone she always gets when she's trying to sound casual, but can't quite pull it off. "You heard about him?" I didn't answer right away. She continued anyway. "He sold his remaining shares, packed up, moved to Denver, quietly, no press, no farewell, nothing." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Figures. Are you okay?" "I am." And I was. I wasn't angry. I didn't want an apology. I didn't need a final conversation where someone tries to rewrite history to make themselves feel better. He gave me the only closure I ever truly needed, his silence. That silence used to be the weight chained around my ribs. Now, it's what makes my breath feel light. It used to trap me in rooms where I questioned myself for hours. Now, it sets me free across park benches and lake shores. Funny how the same thing, from a different angle, becomes something else entirely. The afternoon light is golden today. That soft kind of glow that falls in October when summer's finally given up its fight and autumn fully claims the earth. I walk past the bench where we used to sit together when we still thought we were on the same team. The paint's chipped, the metal's cold, but it remembers. I reach into my coat pocket and pull out the ring. Gold, simple, worn thin underneath from years of habit. It's not heavy, not anymore. I place it on the edge of the bench, nestled between two slats of wood, like it belongs there. Not as a symbol of bitterness, not with resentment. Just done. That chapter closed a long time ago. This is just the footnote. I don't need a fire to burn it away. Let time have it. Let the lake winds decide its fate. She was soft because she believed, I whisper, more to myself than anyone. I'm strong because she did. I walk away without looking back. Miriam meets me at the cafe by the marina, the same one we used to visit during lunch breaks, back when I thought a full inbox meant a full life. She's already got 2 cappuccinos on the table. Hers has foam art, always does. Mine's plain, just the way I like it. Predictable, comforting. So, she says, taking a sip. What now? I stir my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into the dark. Now I live without flinching. She smiles, not the kind people give out of politeness, the kind that says, finally. The wind picks up just a little. Boats bob quietly in the distance. Someone walks their dog along the shore. I glance at the skyline beyond the lake, the same towering glass and steel that once held my shame, my silence, my sacrifices. Now it's just background. That life is over, but not wasted. It taught me how to stand still in a storm, how to speak without shouting, how to leave without slamming a door. I sip the last of my coffee. The mug is chipped on the handle. I smile again. All right. This time, it doesn't mean I'll survive. It means I'm beginning. The woman he called weak built an empire from silence and never looked back.